Welcome to Tales of Warriors channel. Today, we will dive into the riveting world of covert operations of the Israeli intelligence service, the Mossad. This is a compelling stories collection, unveils the clandestine endeavors of Israel's renowned intelligence agency, delving into thrilling accounts of daring missions, strategic triumphs, and the remarkable individuals behind them. Join us on a journey through Mossad's adventurous secret operations. In this video, we will discover the next 3 missions of Israel's Secret Service legacy. This video is suitable for those who have free time, are ready for bed, driving, or need something as background while studying, cleaning, or relaxing. Episode 16. Saddam's Supergun. On March 23, 1918, at the height of World War I, a huge artillery shell exploded in the center of Place de la République in Paris. An hour later, another shell hit the center of Paris, killing 8 people. The explosions terrified the Parisians, since the city, far away from the front lines, was supposed to be safe. The commander of the Paris district immediately sent several squads to scan the forests around the capital, where a German artillery unit must have been hiding. But the search turned up nothing. The French surmised that the shells had been fired from an airship, even though no Zeppelin had been sighted. 6 days later, on Good Friday, another shell exploded in Paris. This time it was a direct hit at the Saint-Gervais church in the 4th arrondissement. The explosion killed 91 people and wounded 100. Panic spread throughout the city. Army patrols fanned out from the capital and didn't find anything. No one had ever heard of a cannon that could hit Paris from such a fantastic distance anyway. The newspapers compared the monster that bombarded them from afar to the huge cannon that writer Jules Verne had described in his book From the Earth to the Moon. Jules Verne's fictional cannon could fire a whole spaceship to the moon. The French were in luck. The war ended that same year with the victory of the Allies over Imperial Germany. Slowly, information started trickling about the horrible cannon that had spread death and panic in the French capital. Some called it the Paris gun, others named it the Wilhelm gun, after Wilhelm II, Germany's emperor. It turned out that it had been developed by the Krupp heavy weapons industry, which had produced 3 of the mysterious cannons. The cannon had an unheard-of range of 128 kilometers, its shells were 3 feet long, with a charge of gunpowder that was 12 feet long. The shell soared to a height of 42 kilometers, a record that was broken only by the German V-2 rockets in World War II. Krupp assembled the 3 superguns in utmost secrecy. The guns were pulled by special trains that moved from one position to the other almost daily. Each was manned by 80 artillery soldiers, who were forbidden to speak to anybody. It was imperative to shroud the monstrous weapons in complete secrecy. As the war approached its end, the maneuvering capacities of the superguns quickly deteriorated. British aircraft discovered the huge guns, hounded them along the rails, and kept bombing them. The French, too, fired at them from positions close to the front lines. Yet none of the attacks were successful. The only gun that was neutralized was one that exploded while firing. 5 soldiers were killed. The other 2 vanished without a trace at the war's end. What happened to them remains a mystery. They may have been dismantled, or concealed in some deep cave or an abandoned mine. The superguns turned into a legend, and many thought their secret would never be solved. But in 1965, an elderly German woman arrived in Canada and met a 37-year-old scientist, Dr. Gerald Bull, who was in charge of the High Altitude Research Program, HARP, at McGill University in Montreal. The woman was a relative of Fritz Rosenberger, the deceased director of design at Krupp Industries. She brought Bull a lost manuscript that she had discovered in the family archives, which described in detail the big gun and the way it was operated. The manuscript fired up Bull's imagination. He was reputed to be a genius who had received his Ph.D. at the age of 23, the youngest Ph.D. to graduate from a Canadian university. Bull dreamed of building superguns that would fire shells at targets hundreds of miles away, and even launch satellites to outer space. Using the manuscript, he wrote a book about the Wilhelm guns and the possibilities they offered to the scientists of the future. But the book was not enough. Bull obtained funding from the US and Canadian governments, as well as from his university. On a testing ground in Barbados, he tested his own huge gun, the longest gun ever built in the world. It was 36 meters long, with a caliber of 424 millimeters. Hundreds of workers, technicians, and engineers, many of them local, participated in the building and testing of the formidable firearm. Bull's cannon excelled in the test firing and dispatched heavy loads to record altitudes. He claimed that if, instead of shells, he armed his gun with missiles propelled by solid fuel, he could fire a 200-pound missile to a distance of 4,000 kilometers or to an altitude of 250 kilometers. Bull's gun was a great achievement, but the US and Canadian governments decided, for various reasons, to stop funding the project. In 1968, Bull was forced to leave Barbados. His frustration knew no limits. With spite and hatred, he attacked the bureaucrats who had aborted his project. For a while he produced artillery shells, and even exported 50,000 shells to Israel for use with American-made guns. He was even rewarded with honorary American citizenship. But he had a very short fuse, was not always able to control his mouth, and clashed with most senior officers and officials he met. The humiliation he had felt at the closure of the test range in Barbados kept burning in him, and he was ready to do anything in order to continue building his big guns. It became his obsession, and nothing could stop him. First he built the GC-45 gun, the most advanced gun of his time that had a range of 40 kilometers. Bull sold the gun to anybody who wanted to buy it. In spite of the United Nations embargo on weapon sales to South Africa, Bull sold his guns to its army, which needed them for the war against neighboring Angola. Bull also sold South Africa a license to build the guns on its territory. Some say the CIA secretly supported Bull's illegal activity. But as soon as the matter became public, Bull's CIA friends vanished into thin air, and he remained alone, exposed to the UN's accusations of having become a cynical, heartless arms trafficker. He was forced to return to the United States, where an unpleasant surprise awaited him. An American court found him guilty of illegal weapons trade, and sentenced him to 6 months in jail. When he was released and returned to Canada, he was fined $55,000. Angry and bitter, he moved to Belgium, where he founded a new company, in association with the United Gunpowder Works, Poudreries Réunies de Belgique. But his obsession did not subside. He kept dreaming of building a huge supergun, worthy of Jules Verne's imagination. Like Goethe's Faust, he was ready to sell his soul to the devil for realizing his dream. And indeed, he found the devil, Iraq's megalomaniac dictator, Saddam Hussein. In the 80s, Iraq was fighting a ruthless war against Iran. Bull sold the Iraqis 200 GC-45 guns, made in Austria and smuggled via the port of Aqaba, in neighboring Jordan. But that was only the beginning. Saddam Hussein, like Bull, was deeply frustrated after Israel had bombed the Tammuz nuclear reactor and shattered his dream to make Iraq a nuclear power. He was also utterly jealous that Israel was on the verge of launching satellites into space. Bull offered to build Saddam the biggest and the longest supergun in the world. With this gun, Bull promised, Saddam would be able to launch satellites into space and fire shells to a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. Saddam realized that he would be able to hit the population centers of Israel and gladly accepted Bull's offer. Bull called his enterprise Project Babylon. Bull drew up the plans for Babylon, a gun 150 meters long, weighing 2,100 tons, with a caliber of 1 meter. But before building his mammoth gun, Bull decided to assemble a smaller prototype, for testing purposes. He called the smaller gun Baby Babylon, even though this baby was bigger than all its ancestors. The gun was 45 meters long, and Saddam's artillery commander was awed by its performance. But this was nothing compared to the real thing that was emerging from the Iraqi desert. Bull chose to place his giant gun on a bare hill, positioning the components of the longest and the fattest gun in the world on the rising slope. After choosing the location, he ordered the parts of his cannon from various European steel plants. The main component, of course, was the barrel that Bull intended to assemble, using scores of huge steel tubes. He ordered the tubes in England, Spain, Holland, and Switzerland. The orders were camouflaged as parts of a large oil pipeline. Because Iraq was subject to draconian international restrictions on importation of strategic materials, once again the orders were filed in the name of neighboring Jordan. The pipes began arriving. The amazing aspect of the entire operation was that most of the states and the companies involved in the production of the pipes understood perfectly well that the pipes were nothing but parts of a giant lethal weapon, but their cynicism and greed, as well as their indifference to the wars in the Middle East, meant that they had no problem cooperating. The huge pipes were given export licenses, loaded on freighters, and sent on their way. Many of them reached Iraq without any trouble. Bull's private army of technicians and engineers started assembling the gun pieces, pointing them west, toward Israel. But Bull was still not satisfied. He built the Iraqis two self-propelled guns, Al-Majnoon and Al-Fao. Al-Majnoon, the crazy one, was immediately integrated into Iraq's artillery. Bull also agreed to improve the Scud missiles in Saddam's arsenal and modify their warheads. He extended the Scud's range and their performances. These missiles would be used against Israel during the First Gulf War. Here, though, Bull crossed a line. According to Bull's son's testimony, Israeli agents warned Bull to stop his dangerous activities. Bull refused to listen. Israel was not alone in its desire to stop the scientist. The CIA and MI6 were also worried. The Iranians, too, had unfinished business with Bull. During the Iran-Iraq War, the Iraqis had used the guns built by Gerald Bull against them. Apparently, Bull did not suffer from a lack of enemies, and they were determined to put an end to his projects. As he ignored the warnings, the foreign agents stepped up their activities. Several times during the winter of 1990, unknown persons broke into Bull's apartment at the Ookla neighborhood in Brussels. They took nothing, just overturned the furniture and emptied cupboards and chest drawers, leaving clear indications of their visit. That was another warning for Bull: "We are here. We can get into your home as we please, and may go even further than that." Once again, Bull ignored the warnings. The gun parts kept arriving, and were placed, one after the other, on the barren hill in Iraq. It seemed that no action could stop Project Babylon. Except one. On March 22, 1990, Bull returned to his Brussels apartment. While he was fumbling in his pocket for the apartment keys, a man emerged from the dark corridor, a silenced gun in his hand, and fired 5 bullets in the back of Bull's head. The father of the great gun collapsed and died on the spot. The world press plunged in speculations about the identity of the killers. Some said the assassins had been sent by the CIA, others pointed at MI6, Angola, Iran. But most of the observers agreed on Israel. The Belgian police started an investigation but did not find a thing. The murderers of Gerald Bull have yet to be found. With Bull's death, work on the big gun immediately stopped. His assistants, engineers, researchers, buyers scattered throughout the world. They were familiar with parts of the project, but the master plan was locked in Bull's head, and only he knew how to proceed. Bull's death was also the death of Babylon. 2 weeks after Bull's death, the British authorities emerged from their long slumber. They finally dispatched a customs unit to the port of Teesport, where they seized 8 huge Sheffield steel pipes, listed in the export manifest as oil pipes. It was a nice try, but too late. The British had missed 44 other oil pipes that were already in service in Iraq. In the following weeks, more components of the giant gun were seized in 5 other European countries. An official investigation in England tried to establish how respectable companies like Sheffield Forge Masters could ignore Saddam Hussein's devious goals and supply steel pipes for the big gun. When the US Army conquered Iraq in 2003, they found piles of the huge pipes, slowly gathering rust in Al-Iskandariya junkyard, about 30 miles south of Baghdad. The rusty pipes were all that was left of the grandiose plans of Dr. Gerald Bull. Gerald Bull's assassination came at a time of profound change in the Mossad character. The new Ramsad, veteran Mossad agent Shabtai Shavit, found a very different service from what the Mossad used to be when he assumed his duties in 1989. A former Sayeret Matkal fighter and head of Caesarea, he seemed the right man for the job. But starting in the early 70s, with the systematic elimination of the leaders of Black September, and much more so in the 80s and 90s, the emphasis in the Mossad activity shifted from intelligence to special operations. The Mossad gradually had to assume most of the operations against the non-military and non-conventional dangers threatening the State of Israel. The formal state organs were unable to efficiently defeat terrorism. The terrorist leaders lived abroad in relative safety, planned their attacks, and dispatched their men against Israeli bodies or citizens throughout the world. Even when Israel knew who they were and what they were doing, they could not arrest them and bring them to justice. The only way left to the Mossad was to find them and kill them. These were brutal, utterly trying actions for those like David Mossad, who carried them out, but they achieved their goals when the killing of the terrorist leaders wiped out or immobilized their organizations for many years. The hunt for the Black September leaders was the best example. The Gerald Bull case had similar results. Even though his assassins were never officially identified, his death was also the death of his evil projects. It was the same with Wadi Haddad. It all started with a box of chocolates. Dr. Wadi Haddad, the head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was one of the most dangerous enemies of Israel. His most notorious operation had been the hijacking of an Air France plane on its way from Tel Aviv to Paris on June 27, 1976. Several terrorists, Arabs, Germans, and South Americans, forced the pilot to land in Entebbe, the capital of Uganda, and demanded the exchange of the Jewish and Israeli hostages for the world's most dangerous terrorists. In a heroic rescue operation, Israeli commandos flew thousands of miles, landed in Entebbe, killed the terrorists, and liberated the hostages. After Entebbe, Haddad realized that his life was in danger and moved his headquarters to Baghdad, where he felt safe. From Iraq, he continued to launch terrorist operations against Israel. The Mossad was determined to kill the arch-terrorist. But how? A painstaking operation was launched, with the goal of discovering everything about Haddad, mostly his weaknesses and vices. A year after the Entebbe rescue, the Mossad agents found out that Haddad adored chocolate, especially fine, Belgian chocolate. The information on Haddad's secret vice came from a reliable Palestinian, who had infiltrated Haddad's Popular Front. The Ramsad, Yitzhak Hafey, presented the information to Israel's new Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, who immediately approved the operation. Mossad agents then recruited one of Haddad's trusted aides, who was on a mission in Europe. On his return, he brought his boss a big box of mouth-watering Godiva chocolates. Mossad experts injected a deadly biological poison into the chocolates filled with sweet cream. They assumed that Haddad, who craved Godiva, would gobble all the chocolates himself and would not even think of sharing them with anybody. The agent brought the gift-wrapped box to Haddad, who, once alone, wolfed down the chocolates, each and every one of them. In a few weeks, the plump Haddad started losing his appetite and losing weight. The blood tests performed by his doctors indicated a severe immune deficiency. Nobody in Baghdad understood what was happening to the leader of the Popular Front. Haddad's health worsened. He became weak, skeletal, and was confined to his bed. As his state became critical, he was urgently transferred to an East German clinic. Like most countries of the Soviet bloc, East Germany offered generous support, training, weapons, and refuge to the Palestinian terrorists. But their otherwise top-notch expertise did not help this time. The East German doctors could not save Haddad, and on March 30, 1978, he died, of unknown causes. The 48-year-old terrorist leader left his sister millions of dollars he had personally hoarded while leading his patriotic war for Palestine. The German doctor's diagnosis was that Haddad had died of a terminal disease that had attacked his immune system. Nobody suspected the Mossad. Some of Haddad's closest aides accused the Iraqi authorities of poisoning him because he had embarrassed the regime. Only after many years were Israeli writers allowed to publish the truth about the Mossad's involvement in Haddad's untimely death. When Yasser Arafat died 30 years later, his aides accused Israel of causing his death. This accusation was never proven, despite the thorough examination and tests run by Arafat's French doctors. With Haddad's death, his lethal organization collapsed. The attacks by Haddad's group against Israel ceased almost completely, and the long battle with one of Israel's vilest enemies was definitely over. After Bull and Haddad, it was Shikaki's turn. In the middle of the 19th century, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire sent the commander of the Imperial Navy, a famous and admired admiral, to conquer the Mediterranean island of Malta. The admiral set sail and wandered for many months in the Mediterranean. But he did not find Malta. The admiral returned to Istanbul, reported to the Sultan, and announced, "Malta yok." In Turkish, there is no Malta. But in our times, there were some who found Malta, and not only found the island but also found a man there who arrived in disguise, under an assumed identity, traveling in total secrecy. This was Dr. Fathi Shikaki, the head of the Islamic Jihad. On October 26, 1995, in the late morning, Fathi Shikaki came out of the Diplomat Hotel in the town of Selma, in Malta. He was on his way to do some shopping before returning to Damascus, where he had been living for the last few years. Shikaki was wearing a wig and carrying a Libyan passport in the name of Ibrahim Shawish. He felt quite safe in the serene Maltese town. He did not know that several Mossad agents had been shadowing him since he flew, a week before, from Malta to Libya, to participate in a conference of underground Palestinian organizations. 9 months before that, on January 22, 2 suicide bombers, members of Shikaki's Islamic Jihad, killed themselves close to a bus station at the Beit Lid Junction, not far from the city of Netanya. 21 people were killed, most of them soldiers, and 68 were wounded. It was one of the bloodiest terrorist attacks in Israeli history. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who rushed to Beit Lid, was deeply shocked by the carnage. His wrath peaked when he read Shikaki's boasts in a Time magazine interview that this was the biggest military attack ever inside Palestine, outside the Arab-Israeli wars. Time, it seems to give you satisfaction? Shikaki, it gives satisfaction to our people. The furious Rabin ordered Ramsad Shabtai Shavit, a career Mossad officer, to kill the head of the Islamic Jihad. Shavit had been stalking Shikaki for a long time. According to the Der Spiegel Weekly, the Mossad proposed to hit Shikaki in his Damascus headquarters. But Rabin refused. He was secretly engaged in peace talks with Syria's President Hafez al-Assad and did not want to jeopardize the slim chances of ending the conflict with Israel's northern neighbor. Rabin asked the Mossad to propose alternative plans for the operation. It was a very complicated mission, Shavit explained, because Shikaki knew he was in the Mossad's crosshairs. That was why he rarely left Syria. Nevertheless, Rabin refused to authorize a hit in Damascus and ordered Mossad to carry out the operation outside of Syria's borders. But where? For a while, the Mossad leaders were at a loss. But, finally, as luck would have it, Shikaki was invited to a conference of Palestinian terrorist organizations in Libya. At first, he replied that he would not come, but then he was told that his archrival, Said Musa, the head of the hated Abu Musa organization, intended to participate in the conference. The Mossad experts assumed that Shikaki would not cede the floor to his adversary, and would come to the conference, at all costs. And indeed, a secret report from Damascus confirmed Shikaki was going to Libya. In Jerusalem, Rabin gave the go-ahead. European sources claim that the preparations for the hit started when the Mossad terrorist experts checked the records of Shikaki's former flights to Libya. It turned out that he always chose to fly to Tripoli via Malta. The Ramsad decided to operate in Malta, not in Libya. Malta was a more convenient and quiet location. Mossad agents waited at Valletta Airport for Shikaki, who was supposed to make a short stopover there on his way to Libya. Shikaki almost fooled his followers by landing in Malta only on the third daily flight from Damascus, in an elaborate disguise. He spent a short while in the transit lounge and took the connecting flight to Libya. On October 26, in the early morning, he came back to Malta and checked into the Diplomat Hotel, where he had stayed previously. He got room 616 and left the hotel immediately. 2 Mossad agents riding a blue motorcycle followed him wherever he went. He spent a couple of hours visiting shops and markets. He was on his way back to the hotel when the blue motorcycle stopped beside him. One of the agents, later described as a man with Middle Eastern features, approached and fired 6 bullets at him from close range, with a silenced gun. Shikaki collapsed on the sidewalk while his killer ran to a nearby alley, where his partner was waiting on the motorcycle, engine running. They darted toward the nearby beach and jumped aboard a speedboat that took them to a freighter waiting in the high seas. The boat officially carried cement from Haifa to Italy, but beside the cement it carried another load, Shabtai Shavit himself, who monitored the operation from an improvised command post on board. The getaway route had been well planned. Nobody followed the 2 agents and they reached the mothership safe and sound. After Shikaki's death, his aides at the Islamic Jihad tried to unravel a major mystery: who was the traitor that had leaked the details about his trip to the Mossad? The killers knew everything: the date of his departure for Malta, the flight number, the false identity, the date of his return to Malta and Damascus. After a 5-month investigation, the Islamic Jihad leaders arrested a Palestinian student, who was a close assistant to Shikaki, and accused him of treason. The student broke under interrogation and confessed. He had been recruited by the Mossad while studying in Bulgaria. His handlers instructed him to move to Damascus and join Shikaki's group. During the next 4 years, he had gained Shikaki's confidence and even became one of the few in the know about Shikaki's activities. Unlike the Hamas and the Hezbollah, which invested a large part of their resources in social activities, the Islamic Jihad had a sole purpose: terror. It was based on a very small and very compartmentalized number of cells, composed of Palestinians who had no other purpose but to fight Israel. Shikaki himself was considered by the Palestinian diaspora to be the ideological father of suicide terrorism. He was the first to find in Islam's holy teachings a legitimization for suicide bombings and killings. Shikaki's organization was responsible for a long list of bloody terrorist attacks: 16 dead in the attack on a 405 bus on the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem on July 6, 1989, 9 dead in the attack on a bus of Israeli tourists close to Cairo, on February 4, 1990, 8 dead in the bombing of a bus by Kfar Darim, in southern Israel on November 20, 2000, 3 soldiers killed at the suicide attack on the Netzarim roadblock in the Gaza Strip on November 11, 1994, and the terrible bombing in Beit Lid, where 21 people died on January 22, 1995. He had rightfully earned the death sentence that the Mossad carried out in a Malta street. After Shikaki's death, the Islamic Jihad almost collapsed, and it took years for the organization to recover from the death of its leader. Israel never assumed responsibility for the assassination. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin said, "I did not know about the assassination, but if it is true I shall not be sorry." A short while afterward, Yitzhak Rabin himself was assassinated, not by a Palestinian terrorist but by a Jewish fanatic. Episode 17. Fiasco in Amman. Baba. Baba. Father. Father. The little girl cried, jumped out of the black Jeep, and ran after her father into a tall office building in central Amman, Jordan. "Baba!" she called, and triggered one of the worst mishaps in the history of the Mossad. The operation had been masterly planned. Even though it seemed somewhat clumsy, it had every chance of success. Its goal was to kill Khaled Mashal, the newly appointed head of the Hamas political bureau. Mashal, a 41-year-old computer engineer, was a handsome man, sporting a well-groomed black beard. He was a rising leader of Hamas, which, in the previous few years, had become Israel's worst enemy. This terrorist organization, fueled by Islamic fanaticism, had replaced the PLO in the ruthless fight against Israel after Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin had made a move toward peace by signing the Oslo agreements together in September 1993. The senior officers of Mossad had proposed Mashal as a target for assassination after a deadly suicide bombing in Jerusalem on July 30, 1997. Two terrorists blew themselves up in the crowded Mahane Yehuda market, killing 16 Israelis and wounding 169 others. Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu called an emergency meeting of the cabinet that decided to kill one of the Hamas leaders. The Ramsad, General Danny Yatom, who had been appointed to his post in 1996, was tasked by Netanyahu with designating which man should die. Yatom had a long military career behind him. A muscular, bald man with a ready smile, he had been a fighter and a deputy commander at Sayeret Matkal, then an Armor Corps officer, and the head of the Israeli Central Command with the rank of Major General. Devoted heart and soul to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, he had been his military secretary. After Rabin's death, he was, to the surprise of many, appointed head of the Mossad. All those who knew him appreciated his efficiency and his military record, but he seemed to lack all of the qualities needed in a man at the helm of a secret organization. His appointment seemed to be more of a tribute to the dead Rabin than a choice of the best man for the job. After his meeting with Netanyahu, in early August 1997, Yatom called an urgent meeting at Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. The heads of the Mossad's major departments were summoned to the conference room. These were Eliza Megan, Yatom's deputy, the head of Caesarea, the Special Operations Department, Yitzhak Barzilai, the head of Tevel, department in charge of cooperation with foreign intelligence services, Ilan Mizrahi, head of Tzamet, the Intelligence Gathering Department, head of Neviot, which specialized in penetrating enemy targets, and the heads of the Research and Terrorism departments. Persons designed by a letter instead of a name are still on active duty. At first, the discussion reached a dead end. The Mossad did not have a full list of the Hamas leaders. The most prominent Hamas chief was Musa Muhammad Abu Marzouk, but the man carried an American passport and any attack on him could create complications with the United States. Khaled Mashal, on the other hand, was unanimously regarded as a suitable target, but his office was in Amman. After signing a peace agreement with Jordan, in October 1994, Prime Minister Rabin had prohibited all Mossad operations in that country. As long as General Yatom was Rabin's military secretary, he followed Rabin's order to the letter, but after he was appointed Ramsad, Yatom decided to ignore the late Rabin's instructions and proposed Mashal's name to Prime Minister Netanyahu. His suggestion was backed by the head of Caesarea and his intelligence officer, Mishka Ben David. Netanyahu agreed, yet, determined to avoid a crisis with Jordan, he ordered a quiet operation, not a showy hit. Yatom charged the Kaidan Group, the elite unit of Caesarea, with executing the operation. A doctor of biochemistry, employed at the Mossad Research Department, suggested using a lethal poison that had been developed in the Biology Institute in Nes Ziona. A few drops of this poison, sprinkled on a person's skin, would cause his death. This poison did not leave any traces and could not be detected even in an autopsy. A similar poison was used in the past, in the Godiva affair against Wadi Haddad, the head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, see Chapter 16. The poison thing didn't bother you? Israeli journalist Ronan Bergman asked Mishka Ben David years later. Such a disgusting way to die. Tell me, Ben David answered, a bullet in the head or a missile fired at the car is more humane than poison. It would have been better, of course, if there was no need to kill people, but in the war against terror this is unavoidable. The Prime Minister's decision to carry out a quiet operation in order not to harm our relations with Jordan was a logical one. In the summer of 1997, some passers-by in a Tel Aviv street saw two young men shaking cans of Coca-Cola, then pulling their tabs and opening them. The bubbly drink squirted out with a sizzling noise. For a moment, the people on the street cast annoyed looks at the two young men, and then kept moving. They could not guess that the two were Mossad agents, rehearsing Mashal's killing. One of them would open a Coke can in his vicinity to divert his attention, while the other would squirt a few drops of poison at the back of his neck. 6 weeks before the operation, in August 1997, the first agents arrived in Jordan. They carried foreign passports and followed Mashal's daily routine. When does he leave his home? Who rides with him in his car in the morning? What is the route he takes and where does he go? How is the road traffic when he travels? They measured the time between his getting out of his car and entering this or that building, checked if he stopped on his way to talk with other people entering the same building, and collected any other bits of information that could influence the operational plans. The advance team's report to Kaidan headquarters summed up the results of the preliminary mission. Every morning, Mashal came out of his house without bodyguards. He got into a black SUV driven by his assistant, and headed for the Palestinian Relief Bureau at the Shamia Center building in Amman. After Mashal got out, the driver departed with the vehicle. Mashal walked the short distance to the building and entered. The Palestinian Relief Bureau was a cover name for the Hamas headquarters in the Jordanian capital. The surveillance report by the advance team also suggested the best way to hit Mashal: in the morning, on the sidewalk, after he got out of the SUV and walked to the office building. The preparations continued through the summer: surveillance, dispatch of other auxiliary teams to Amman, renting safe houses and vehicles. Suddenly, on September 4th, another terrorist attack shook Jerusalem. 3 Hamas members blew themselves up on Ben Yehuda Street, killing 5 Israelis, wounding 181. Israel could not wait any longer, it was time to act. September 24, 1997, a day before the operation. A couple of tourists linger by the pool of a big Amman hotel. The man is wearing a white bathrobe. He tells the hotel employees that he is recovering from a heart attack. His slow, cautious walk proves that he still suffers from the side effects of his illness. The young woman with him is a doctor. Every once in a while, she checks his pulse and his blood pressure. Most of the time, they lie on the chaises by the pool. The heart patient is Mishka Ben David, in charge of the communication between the Mossad headquarters and the agents on the ground. The woman, a Mossad agent as well, is a real doctor who carries an injection of antidote to the poison destined to kill Mashal. The antidote is capable of neutralizing the effect of the poison. It would be used if one or more Kaidan agents are accidentally exposed to some drops of the poison during the operation. An immediate shot of the antidote would be the only way to save them from certain death. While the phony patient and the doctor are waiting by the pool, the hit team is making the last preparations. In the last few days, several agents have arrived to Amman. They will drive the escape vehicles and fill secondary roles. After them, the hit team itself has arrived, 2 Kaidan agents, posing as Canadian tourists by the names of Sean Kendall and Barry Beads. The 2 of them have checked into the Intercontinental Hotel. In retrospect, disturbing questions arise concerning these 2. Why were they chosen, even though they had never operated in an Arab country? And why did they get Canadian passports, when even the most superficial inspection would prove that they were not Canadians? Their English was stilted, their accent Israeli, and their cover certain to be pulverized by a serious investigation. But all this paled in comparison with the surveillance team's error, exposed only after the operation was launched. The hit was to take place at the entrance to the Shamia Center building, where Mashal's office was located. The encounter between the Kaidan agents and Mashal was supposed to be quick and deadly. Sean and Barry had to approach Mashal, spray the liquid poison on the back of his neck, and escape aboard a vehicle that was waiting nearby. The two Canadians were well prepared after their training in the streets of Tel Aviv. Sean was to hold the Coke can. When facing Mashal, he had to pull the tab and accidentally spray the Coke in his direction. But the Coke, of course, was not the story. Barry, who held the small container of poison, was the main figure in the operation. In a matter of seconds, he had to spray the poison from his container toward Mashal. The Coke can was supposed to divert his attention from the poison spray. The liquid would spread on his skin and make him die of a heart attack. Two other tourists, a man and a woman, were to wait inside the building lobby in case the hit team needed help. For instance, Mashal might walk too fast toward the building, and the two Canadians may not be able to get to him. In such case, the tourists were supposed to get out of the building and bump into Mashal, delaying him until the hit men reached him. That way, the Mossad planners believed, there would be no confrontation with the Jordanians. The key to success was the situation on the ground, target area clean of bodyguards, family members, acquaintances, police officers, Hamas militants, and others who could thwart the hit. And indeed, the instructions to the 8 agents sent to Jordan were clear: carry out the operations only if all the above conditions are fulfilled. Danny Yadom maintains that he had told the agents, if the conditions differ from the original planning, we can always execute at a later date. As far as we know, that was what really happened. The agents came several times to the target area but aborted the hit because of unexpected problems: the presence of Jordanian police officers in the area, bodyguards who escorted Mashal, or Mashal's last-minute decision not to go to the office that day. September 25, 1997, D-Day. The operation commander takes position across the street, in front of the office building. It has been decided not to use cell phones or electronic communication instruments in the target area, and the agents would communicate by manual and body signs. In case they needed to abort the operation, the commander would notify the two agents by removing his visor cap. Behind the building, the getaway car is waiting for the two hit men. Sean and Barry are in place, and so is the couple in the lobby of the building. Everything is ready. In Mashal's home, it is almost a perfectly routine morning, but for a small, last-minute change. Mashal's wife asks him to take the two children to school today. Usually she takes care of that. The children get in the SUV with their father, but the Mossad surveillance team does not notice them, and reports to the Kaidan people that Mashal is on his way, alone in the car with the driver. The agents fail to notice the two kids who are sitting in the back. The car windows are tinted and the children cannot be seen from the outside. Mashal arrives to the Shamia Center, gets out of the car, crosses the sidewalk, and starts climbing the stairs leading to the building entrance. The two hit men approach him, 10 meters, 5, 3. Suddenly Mashal's little girl emerges from the SUV. "Baba! Baba!" She calls and starts running toward her father. The driver jumps out of the car and follows the child. The operation commander, who is positioned across the street, notices the child. He removes his hat and tries to signal to his men to abort. But in these critical seconds, the two agents are getting around one of the concrete pillars at the building entrance, and for a moment they lose contact with their commander. And even worse, they don't see the little girl and the driver who runs after her. The hit men proceed with their mission. They reach Mashal, and Sean shakes the Coke can and pulls the tab. But today, for the first time, the tab tears but the can does not open. The diversion fails. Barry nonetheless raises his hand, to spray the poison on Mashal's neck. But Mashal's driver, who runs after the child, sees the stranger's raised hand and thinks he is trying to stab his boss. He starts to shout, darts toward Barry, and tries to strike him with a folded newspaper. Mashal hears his driver's shouts and turns back. At this moment, Barry sprays the poison and a few drops fall on Mashal's ear. He feels only a light prick, but realizes that something is wrong, and runs away as fast as he can. Sean and Barry rush toward the getaway car. At this point, another character enters the scene, Mohammed Abu Sif, a Hamas militant who is on his way to deliver some documents to Mashal. He hears the shouts and sees the confrontation between his leader and the two agents. While Mashal is running for his life, Abu Sif tries to stop Sean and Barry, who are about to get into the getaway car, a third snag in the ill-fated mission. He struggles with Sean, who hits him with the unopened Coke can. Sean and Barry manage to jump into the car. It darts off. But then they make the most critical mistake in the operation. The driver tells Sean and Barry that he has seen Abu Sif writing down the car's license plate number. The two hit men decide on the spot to abandon the car. They fear that Abu Sif would alert the police, and if they get to the hotel with that car, as planned, they will be arrested there. They have no address of a safe house, no other escape route. Barry and Sean get out of the car after a few blocks, and the driver speeds away to get rid of the car. But it turns out that Abu Sif, a veteran of the Mujahideen, who had fought in Afghanistan against the Russians, has not given up. The stubborn and agile man has been running after the Israelis' car. Sean and Barry, who have left the car and are now walking on both sides of the street, have not noticed him till he jumps Barry, grabs his shirt, and starts yelling that this man has tried to hurt Mashal. Sean, who is on the other sidewalk, across the street, rushes to his partner's aid. He slams into Abu Sif, wounding him slightly in the head, and throws him into a roadside ditch. The struggle continues. A crowd quickly assembles around them and converges on the two foreigners who seem to be beating a fellow Arab. A police officer appears on the scene, disperses the crowd, stops a taxi, and makes the two strangers and the badly beaten Abu Sif get in. The taxi heads for the police station. At the police station, the officers at first thought that Abu Sif had attacked the two foreigners, but after he recovered from the beating, he accused them of assaulting Mashal. The Jordanian investigators checked the passports of the two men, and when they realized they were Canadians, they alerted the Canadian consul. The diplomat spoke for a short while with Sean and Barry, and told the Jordanians, "I don't know who these guys are, but of one thing I am sure, Canadians they're not." The Jordanians, still unaware of the treasure that had fallen into their hands, decided to keep the two foreigners in custody and allowed them to make one phone call. The agents reached Mossad operational headquarters in Europe and reported their arrest. Simultaneously, a female agent, who had taken part in the operation and watched the scene in front of Shamia Center, understood that a serious failure had occurred, and decided to alert the heart patient, Mishka Ben David, the senior Mossad officer in the Jordanian capital. She rushed to his hotel. Seeing her, he immediately understood that the worst had happened. The standing orders for the operation were that no one was to come near him, with one exception, if the operation had misfired, and all agents had to be pulled out of the country at once. Ben David discarded his robe, dressed quickly, and hurried to the secret meeting place that had been prepared beforehand. Soon after, the operation commander arrived as well. He, too, was aware of the failure. Yet none of them could imagine the chaos that was about to unfold. Mishka sent an immediate report to Mossad headquarters. Ramsad Dani Yatom discussed the situation with the department heads, and decided to order the agents to seek refuge at the Israeli embassy in Amman, and not use the escape route they had rehearsed beforehand. Back in Jordan, everyone left the meeting place and headed for the embassy. Only the doctor remained in the hotel. In the meantime, in a different Amman neighborhood, the poison had begun its deadly work on Mashal. He collapsed and was taken to a hospital. The Israelis realized that if he did not get the antidote, he was going to die in a few hours. Netanyahu received the bad news in his car, while on his way to a Jewish New Year's party at Mossad headquarters. An amazing coincidence. Yatom briefed the Prime Minister. Netanyahu was appalled. He decided that the Ramsad should fly to Amman immediately, meet with King Hussein, and tell him everything, without any diversion or lies. From Mossad headquarters, the Prime Minister called King Hussein and told him he was sending over the Mossad on a very important matter. The king agreed right away, even though he had no idea what the meeting was about. Netanyahu's aides, who were at his side at that time, maintained that he was overwhelmed with anxiety and instructed Yatom to agree to any demand of the king in exchange for the return of the agents to Israel. He also ordered Yatom to offer the antidote to the Jordanians and save Mashal from certain death. Sharon would say later, "I saw Netanyahu in the Mashal affair. He went to pieces completely and we had to assemble him again. He was under pressure and was ready to give up everything." King Hussein, distraught, listened to Yatom's report and ordered his people to find out what Mashal's condition was. The accurate diagnosis arrived right away. The man's condition was quickly deteriorating. The king ordered him transferred immediately to the royal hospital, and accepted Yatom's offer of the antidote that could save him. In an absurd twist in this harrowing affair, the Israelis and the Jordanians engaged in a race against time to save the life of their enemy, an arch-terrorist. Mishka Ben David returned to the hotel. The ampoule of the antidote was in his pocket. "I was moving around with the antidote in my possession," he said in a later interview with Ronan Bergman, "knowing that it is of no use anymore, as none of our men had been affected by the poison. Only our target was in critical condition. I decided to destroy the antidote, as I feared I might be caught with it. But then I got a call from the unit commander in Israel. He asked me if I still had the antidote, and when I said yes, he asked me to go down to the hotel lobby. A captain of the Jordanian army was waiting there for me," he said, "and he had to take the antidote to the hospital right away." But at that moment, another unexpected problem arose. The doctor who was supposed to administer the antidote to the dying Mashal refused to do it unless the Mossad ordered her to do so in person. Danny Yatom, who had left the royal palace and was on his way to the embassy, called her and ordered her to go with Mishka. But upon their arrival at the hospital, the Jordanians flatly refused to have an Israeli doctor inject the antidote. Perhaps they feared she would only try to finish the job. Complicating things further, the king's physician, who was charged with saving Mashal, refused to administer the antidote without knowing the chemical formulas of the poison and of the antidote. He did not want to assume responsibility for Mashal's life, lest the Israelis outsmart him and kill the man. A new crisis broke out. Both sides entrenched themselves in their positions, the Jordanians demanding the formulas and the Israelis refusing. Mashal's condition worsened rapidly. He stopped breathing and was connected to a respirator in the intensive care unit of the Royal Hospital. It was clear to everybody involved that if Mashal died, it would be disastrous for the fragile relations of the two countries. The king, who felt deeply hurt by the Israelis, even threatened to order his army to break into the embassy and arrest the 4 Mossad agents, who had found refuge there. He also said that he would put an end to any political and military cooperation with Israel. The hours ticked by and the tension kept growing. The king announced that if Mashal died, he would sentence his killers, the 2 agents kept in custody by the Jordanian police, to death. He also placed an urgent call to U.S. President Bill Clinton. The Americans immediately started pressuring Israel to deliver the formula to the Jordanians. Netanyahu plunged into a marathon of meetings with various groups of advisors and cabinet ministers. He finally yielded and gave the formula to the Jordanians. The Jordanian doctor administered the antidote to Mashal. The reaction was immediate. Mashal opened his eyes. When the news about Mashal's recovery reached Israel, everybody let out a sigh of relief, as if their long-lost brother in Jordan was saved, thank God. Mishka Ben David and the doctor were able to leave Jordan. 6 Mossad agents remained in Amman, 4 at the embassy, and 2 held by the Jordanian police. In the intensive care unit, Mashal's condition kept improving. Israel sent a high-level delegation to Amman, which included Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Minister of Foreign Affairs Ariel Sharon, and Minister of Defense Yitzhak Mordecai. King Hussein, however, refused to receive the delegation and sent his brother Hassan to meet them. The cabinet also summoned Ephraim Halevi, a former deputy Ramsad and King Hussein's personal friend. Halevi was now Israel's ambassador to the European Union in Brussels. He traveled to Amman immediately, and offered the king a deal. In exchange for the 4 agents at the embassy, Israel would release from prison the charismatic founder and leader of Hamas, the Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. The king agreed, and the 4 agents returned to Israel with Halevi. The final negotiation was entrusted to Ariel Sharon, who maintained close relations with the king. Sharon demanded the release of the 2 Qaidan agents who were still in custody. In exchange, the Jordanians demanded the release of 20 Jordanian prisoners held by Israel. Sharon agreed. But at the last moment, the Jordanians changed their mind, and demanded more concessions from Israel. Sharon lost his cool in the presence of the king. "If you continue like this," he angrily said, "our people will remain in your hands, we'll cut your water, which Israel was supplying to Jordan, and we'll kill Mashal one more time." Sharon's outburst turned out to be very effective, and the deal was closed. 2 Israeli helicopters landed in Jordan. One of them took the 2 Qaidan agents back to Israel, the other one brought over Sheikh Yassin, who had been released from prison. The Israeli and world media criticized and ridiculed the Mossad operation in Jordan. Netanyahu was also harshly attacked for his handling of the affair. He had no choice but to establish a board of inquiry to investigate the operational failure in Jordan. The board completely cleared the prime minister, but blamed the Ramsad for faults in his performance and for launching an operation that was bound to fail from the start. Yet they did not ask for Yatom's resignation. Following the fiasco in Amman, Jordan's relations with Israel reached a new low. Khaled Mashal, who was still a minor figure in Hamas, gained stature in the organization and became one of its major leaders. After Sheikh Yassin's death, Mashal rose to the overall leadership of Hamas. The prestige of the Mossad in Israel and the world, and even in the eyes of its leaders and agents, was badly scarred. Danny Yatom, who had failed all throughout the operation, was openly criticized by many of the Mossad senior officers. Eliza Megan, Yatom's deputy, bluntly said that he was not qualified to be a Ramsad. In spite of the criticism, Yatom wouldn't resign. The only one who assumed responsibility for the mishap was the head of Caesarea, who immediately submitted his resignation. It took 5 more months, till February 1998, when a Mossad agent was arrested in Switzerland while trying to tap the phone line of a Hezbollah member, for Yatom to finally give in. "I assumed a commander's responsibility," he said in an interview with the Haaretz newspaper, and decided to resign because of the mishaps in Jordan and Switzerland. He was replaced by Ephraim Halevi, the former deputy Ramsad who had successfully negotiated with King Hussein the release of the 4 agents involved in the Mashal fiasco. Episode 18. From North Korea with Love. On a pleasant London evening in July 2007, a guest left his room in a Kensington hotel. He took the elevator to the lobby and went out to a car waiting for him by the entrance. He was a senior Syrian official who had arrived from Damascus that very afternoon. Now he was on his way to a meeting. As soon as he exited through the revolving doors, 2 men got up from armchairs in a far corner of the lobby. They knew exactly where to go. Reaching the Syrian's room, they gained access with a special electronic device. They were ready to search the room methodically, but this time, their task was easy. A laptop computer was on the desk. The 2 men turned it on and, within moments, expertly installed a sophisticated version of a Trojan horse software. The program allowed them to monitor and copy from afar all the files stored in the computer's memory. The job done, the 2 men left the hotel undetected. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv studied the computer files and were stunned. At an urgent meeting of department heads, they described the priceless information that had fallen into their hands, a collection of files, photographs, drawings, and documents that exposed, for the first time, Syria's top-secret nuclear program. The material was of supreme importance and included the construction plans for a nuclear reactor in a remote desert area, correspondence between the Syrian government and high-level officials in the North Korean administration, and photographs showing the reactor encased in concrete. Another photograph showed two men, one of them turned out to be a senior official in the North Korean atomic project and the other was Ibrahim Othman, the head of the Syrian Atomic Energy Commission. The findings confirmed several fragmentary reports that had reached the Israel intelligence community in 2006 and 2007. The reports indicated that the Syrian government was building, in utmost secrecy, a nuclear reactor at the desert site of Dir al-Zur, in the far northeast of the country. The isolated site was adjacent to the Turkish border, and some 100 miles from Iraqi territory. Perhaps the most surprising revelation in the reports was the fact that the Syrian facility was being planned and supervised by North Korean nuclear experts and financed by Iran. The close cooperation between Syria and North Korea had started with the 1990 visit to Damascus of North Korea's president, Kim Il-sung. During that visit, at the instigation of Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, the two countries had signed an agreement on military and technological cooperation. Even though the nuclear issue was discussed in talks between the two heads of state, Assad decided to give it only secondary priority at that time and concerned himself mostly with the development of chemical and biological weapons. Moreover, he cancelled plans to buy nuclear reactors from Russia. In February 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, a first shipment of Scud missiles from North Korea was unloaded in Syria. Reports on the existence of the missiles reached Moshe Arentz, Israel's Minister of Defense. Several army generals recommended a military strike be initiated to destroy the Scuds before they became operational. Arentz dismissed the idea, wishing to avoid another conflagration in the region. At Hafez al-Assad's funeral in June 2000, his son and successor, Bashar al-Assad, met with another North Korean delegation. The two parties secretly discussed the construction of a nuclear facility in Syria, to be overseen by the Syrian Scientific Research Agency. In July 2002, another secret meeting was held in Damascus, with the participation of senior officials from Syria, Iran, and North Korea, at which a tripartite agreement was reached. North Korea would construct a nuclear reactor in Syria, to be financed by Iran. The cost of the entire project, from the drawing board to the production of weapons-grade plutonium, was estimated at $2 billion. For the next 5 years, despite small scraps of information that trickled from Damascus, neither the CIA nor the Mossad were aware of the Syrian project. Several warning lights had flashed sporadically, but had been ignored. The American intelligence services failed to grasp the meaning of the information that had accumulated, while the Mossad and Amman were misled by their own estimates that Syria had neither the capability nor the desire to obtain nuclear weapons. And no one sought to challenge that misconception, although evidence was there. In 2005, the cargo ship Andorra, a ship carrying cement from North Korea to Syria, sank close to the Israeli coastal town of Nahariya. In 2006, a second North Korean cargo vessel, sailing under a Panamanian flag, was detained in Cyprus with another cargo of cement and a portable radar station. In both cases, the cement was evidently equipment for the nuclear reactor. Finally, in late 2006, Iranian nuclear experts visited Damascus to inspect the progress of the construction of the facility. The Israeli and American intelligence services knew of this visit but failed to realize that it was linked to the Dir al-Zur project. The Syrians took extreme precautions to protect the secrecy of the project. They imposed a total communications blackout on all the staff working at the site. Possession of cell phones and satellite devices was strictly forbidden. All communications were taken out by messengers, who carried letters and messages and delivered them by hand. The activity at the site could not be identified from space, even though American and Israeli satellites kept passing overhead. And then, suddenly, on February 7, 2007, a passenger alighted from a plane at Damascus airport. He was Ali Reza Askari, an Iranian general and a former deputy minister of defense, who had been one of the leaders of the Revolutionary Guards, see Chapter 2. He stayed at the airport until he received confirmation that his family had left Iran. He then flew on to Turkey. Soon after landing in Istanbul, he vanished. A month later, it was learned that Askari had defected to the West in an operation masterminded by the CIA and the Mossad. He was interrogated and debriefed at an American base in Germany, where he revealed the existence of the Syrian-Iranian nuclear plans and the agreement between North Korea, Iran, and Syria. He told his interlocutors that Iran was not only financing the Dir al-Zur project but was exerting strong pressure on Syria to complete it as soon as possible. He supplied the CIA and the Mossad with a wealth of detail about the progress of the project, and identified the key officials in both Syria and Iran, who were involved in it. This new information shocked the Mossad into action, and it immediately switched into an operational mode. Since 2002, the Ramsad was Meir Dagon, who had replaced Ephraim Halevi, see Chapter 1. According to foreign sources, Dagon assigned units and agents to verify the Askari report. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert convened a meeting of the Army Chiefs of Staff, the Ministry of Defense, and the intelligence services. They unanimously agreed that an urgent operation was called for, so as to obtain solid and irrefutable information about the Dir al-Zur facility. Israel could not accept the transformation of Syria, its most implacable and aggressive foe, into a power with the potential to manufacture nuclear weapons. It was just 5 months after Askari's defection that the Mossad agents achieved their major breakthrough, the laptop of the Syrian official. The heads of the Mossad and Amman could now present Prime Minister Olmert with the definitive evidence the government needed. Soon after, Dagon allegedly pulled off another coup. In a bold and creative operation, a Mossad case officer managed to recruit one of the scientists employed at the reactor itself. He photographed the reactor extensively, both inside and out, and even made a video of the structures and equipment inside them. These were the first images the Mossad had received of the reactor, taken at ground level. They revealed a large cylindrical structure with thin but solid fortified walls. Other pictures showed an external scaffold designed to strengthen the reactor's outer walls. There were also photos of a second, smaller building equipped with oil pumps, and several trucks could be seen parked around it. A third structure was apparently a tower that supplied water for the reactor. The Mossad kept the Americans fully briefed at every step and furnished them with copies of all reports and photos, including satellite pictures and transcripts of phone calls between Syria and North Korea. Under relentless pressure from Israel, the United States put its own satellites on the case. Both the satellite pictures and electronic tracking of the exchange of phone calls indicated that the Syrians were constructing at breakneck speed. In June 2007, Prime Minister Olmert flew to Washington with all the material Israel had collected. He met with President Bush and told him Israel had decided that the Syrian reactor had to be destroyed. Olmert suggested that the United States carry out an air strike against the reactor, but the American president refused. According to American sources, the White House responded that the U.S. chooses not to attack the reactor. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Defense Secretary Robert Gates tried to persuade Israel to confront the Syrians, but not attack. Bush and National Security Advisor Steve Hadley expressed their support for military action in principle, but asked that any operation be delayed until more clearly threatening intelligence could be obtained. In July 2007, Israel carried out high-altitude air sorties and programmed its OFEC-7 spy satellite to take detailed photographs of the reactor. These photos, when analyzed by American and Israeli experts, established clearly that Syria was building a reactor identical to North Korea's nuclear facility at Yongbyon. A video that Israel shared with the United States showed that the cores of both reactors were identical, including the way in which the uranium rods were placed inside the structure. Other videos even showed the faces of North Korean engineers working inside the reactor. Additionally, The Amman Intercept Department, Unit 8200, produced full transcripts of hectic exchanges between Damascus and Pyongyang. All this evidence was relayed to Washington, but the United States still demanded irrefutable proof that the facility was indeed a nuclear reactor and that radioactive materials were actually in place. Israel felt it had no choice but to obtain this information as well. In August 2007, Israel came up with the ultimate proof that the facility at Dir al-Zur was a nuclear reactor. It was obtained by an elite commando unit, Sayeret Matkal, in an operation that risked the lives of scores of Israeli soldiers. Sayeret Matkal commandos flew to Syria by night in 2 helicopters. They were wearing Syrian army uniforms. Bypassing populated areas, military bases, and radar stations, they landed undetected close to Dir al-Zur, then approached the reactor site and collected soil samples from the earth surrounding the reactor. Upon analysis back in Israel, these samples were found to be highly radioactive, proving irrefutably that radioactive substances were indeed on site. This new evidence was presented to Steve Hadley. Once his experts had checked the soil samples, he realized that the matter was deadly serious. He summoned his closest aides, and their conclusions were brought before President Bush at Hadley's daily briefing at the Oval Office. Hadley then held talks with Dagon, and concluded that the reactor indeed posed a clear and present danger. The United States now accepted that the Syrian reactor had to be eliminated, and codenamed the Dir al-Zur operation, the Orchard. In his memoirs, George W. Bush wrote that he considered for a while attacking the reactor, but after discussing the options with his national security team, he finally decided against it. He felt that bombing a sovereign country with no warning or announced justification would create severe blowback. He also ruled out a covert raid by U.S. soldiers. Nevertheless, Olmert phoned President Bush and asked him to destroy the reactor. During the phone conversation, Bush was in the Oval Office, surrounded by his closest aides, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, Vice President Dick Cheney, Steve Hadley and his deputy Elliott Abrams, and others. In the preliminary consultations, Rice had convinced them to reject Israel's demand. "George, I'm asking you to bomb the compound," Olmert said. "I cannot justify an attack on a sovereign nation," Bush replied, "unless my intelligence agencies stand up and say it's a weapons program." Bush recommended using diplomacy. "Your strategy is very disturbing to me," Olmert bluntly said. "I'll do what I believe necessary to protect Israel." "This guy has balls," Bush later said. "That's why I like him." According to London Sunday Times, Prime Minister Olmert met with Minister of Defense Ehud Barak and Minister of Foreign Affairs Tzipi Livni. The three of them, together with the heads of the defense and intelligence communities, discussed the new evidence, as well as the possible repercussions of a military strike. Finally, the die was cast: the Syrian reactor would be eliminated. The Prime Minister briefed opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu and received his wholehearted support. The date for the attack was set for the night of September 5, 2007. The previous day, according to a later report in the Sunday Times, another elite commando unit, Shaldag, Kingfisher, had reached the Dir al-Zur area. The men spent almost a day in hiding close to the reactor. Their mission was to illuminate the reactor with laser beams the following night so the Air Force jets could home in directly on the target. At 11 p.m. on September 5, 10 F-15 aircraft took off from the Ramat David Air Force Base and headed west, over the Mediterranean. 30 minutes later, 3 of the planes were ordered to return to base. The other 7 were instructed to head for the Turkish-Syrian border and turn south toward Dir al-Zur. On the way, they bombed a radar station, crippling the Syrian air defense's ability to identify the approach of foreign aircraft. Minutes later, they reached Dir al-Zur, and from a carefully calculated distance, they launched Maverick air-to-surface missiles and half-ton bombs, hitting their target with precision. The Syrian reactor, intended to build atomic bombs for Israel's destruction, was obliterated in seconds. Prime Minister Olmert, anxious to avoid a Syrian military reaction, established urgent contact with the Prime Minister of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, and asked him to convey a message to President Assad. Israel had no intention of going to war with Syria, Olmert emphasized, but could not accept a nuclear Syria on its doorstep. But Olmert's reassurance proved unnecessary. On the morning after the bombing, the reaction from Damascus was total silence. Not a word was uttered by government spokesman. Only at 3 o'clock that afternoon was an official statement issued by the Syrian news agency. It stated that Israeli aircraft had penetrated Syrian airspace at 1 a.m. Our Air Force forced them to retreat, after they had dropped ammunition over a deserted area. There was no damage to people or equipment. The world media was desperate to learn how the Mossad had managed to obtain photos and even videos from the interior of the Syrian reactor. ABC television reported that Israel either had planted an agent inside the Syrian reactor or the Mossad had recruited one of the engineers who had supplied it with the pictures of the facility. In April 2008, some 7 months after the destruction of the reactor, the American administration finally announced that the Syrian facility had been a nuclear reactor built with North Korean support and that it was not designed for peaceful uses. George W. Bush thought Olmert's execution of the strike against the Syrian reactor had restored the confidence he had lost in the Israelis during their 2006 war against Lebanon, which Bush felt was bungled. Officials in the U.S. intelligence community showed amazed congressmen and senators slides that made clear the similarity between the Syrian reactor and the North Korean Yongbyon reactor. A slideshow with the satellite photos, drawings, and plans, as well as the videos, established the provenance of these materials. Israel succeeded in keeping the secret for just 2 weeks, during which it denied it had attacked the reactor. But then opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu, interviewed on a live newscast, declared, "When the cabinet takes action for Israel's security, I give it my full backing. And here, too, I was a partner in this affair from the first moment and I gave it my full support." A final episode in the Syrian nuclear project took place 11 months later, on August 2, 2008. That evening, a convivial dinner party was taking place on the spacious veranda of a beach house at Rimal El Zahabiyah, north of the Syrian port of Tartus. The house, close to the water, had a spectacular view of the Mediterranean. The veranda, facing the dark waves, was a welcome refuge from the humidity of the Syrian coast. A soft sea breeze cooled the stifling midsummer heat. The guests, seated at an oblong table, were close friends of the villa's owner, General Mohammed Suleiman, who had invited them for a relaxing weekend. Suleiman was President Assad's closest advisor on military and defense matters. He had supervised the building of the reactor and managed its security. In the highest circles of power in Syria, he was regarded as Assad's shadow. His office was in the palace, adjacent to that of the president, yet he was known only to a select few both inside and outside the country. His name was never mentioned in the Syrian media, but the Mossad knew of him and had followed his activities closely. The 47-year-old Suleiman had studied engineering at Damascus University, where he had met and befriended another student, Bassel al-Assad, the favorite son and heir apparent of President Hafez al-Assad. When Bassel was killed in a road accident in 1994, Assad introduced Suleiman to his younger son, Bashar. Assad died of cancer in 2000 and Bashar replaced him as president, and then appointed Suleiman his confidant and trusted aide. Suleiman soon became one of the most powerful men in Syria. President Assad charged him with supervision of all sensitive military matters. He became the senior liaison between the president and the Iranian intelligence services, especially on matters concerning their secret cooperation with terrorist organizations in the Middle East. He was also the primary Syrian contact with Hezbollah and maintained a close relationship with that organization's military chief, Imad Mughniya. After Israel had withdrawn from the security zone in South Lebanon, in May 2000, Suleiman took charge of the transfer of weapons from Iran and Syria to Hezbollah, especially the delivery of long-range rockets. During the Second Lebanon War in 2006, one such rocket scored a direct hit on the Israeli railway workshops in Haifa, killing 8 workers. Later on, Suleiman supplied Hezbollah with Syrian-manufactured surface-to-air missiles, thus jeopardizing Israel's air activities in Lebanon. And Suleiman held another, unique and top-secret position. He was a senior member of the Syrian Research Committee that dealt with the development of long-range rockets, chemical and biological weapons, and nuclear research. He had overseen the liaison with North Korea, coordinated the shipment of reactor parts to Syria, and directed the security measures isolating the North Korean technicians and engineers working on the construction of the reactor. Israel's destruction of the reactor was a heavy blow for Suleiman. After recovering from the initial shock, he started planning another reactor, the location of which was yet to be decided. But Suleiman's life had become more difficult. He knew now that he was wanted by both the American and Israeli secret services. So, before embarking on plans for his next stage, he took a few days' leave at his home in Rimal el-Zahabiyah. A quiet weekend with good friends and excellent food seemed the best way to alleviate his stress. From the center of his large table, Suleiman watched the waves rolling toward the beach. But he failed to notice 2 motionless figures crouching in the water some 150 yards away. They had swum in from the sea, where a boat had dropped them off about a mile from Suleiman's home. Israeli naval commandos and expert sharpshooters, they carried scuba equipment and had made their way underwater to the beach opposite the house. As their feet touched bottom, they stood and picked out Suleiman's home. They studied the house and the veranda, looked at all the people seated at the table, and focused on their target, the general sitting between his guests. At 9 p.m., the sharpshooters calibrated their sights and adjusted the range. The veranda was crowded, and the 2 uninvited guests in their black diving suits wanted to make sure they could fire at the general without harming anybody else. They emerged from the water and took a few steps, then aimed their weapons equipped with silencers at Suleiman's head. An electronic signal beeped in their earphones and they fired simultaneously. The shots were fatal. Suleiman's head flew back and he collapsed forward, onto the food-laden table. The guests at first did not grasp what had happened. Only when they noticed the blood oozing from Suleiman's head did they understand he had been shot. All hell broke loose on the veranda, some trying to come to their host's aid, others crouching in fear or aimlessly running around, shouting and yelling. In the uproar, the 2 sharpshooters disappeared. The Sunday Times published a slightly different version of the event. It said that the sharpshooters were members of the Israeli Naval Commando, Flotilla 13, who had arrived on the Syrian coast aboard a yacht belonging to an Israeli businessman, and had sailed back immediately after fulfilling their mission. When the news reached Damascus, it caused a tremendous shock, but the government kept silent and did not respond to the media coverage. The military and security establishments were confused. How did the hit team reach Tartus, which was 140 miles away from Damascus? How did they escape? Was there no place in Syria where its leaders were safe? Only after a few days a laconic communiqué was issued, announcing that Syria is undertaking an investigation to find the perpetrators of this crime. But the press in other Arab countries had not waited for this official reaction. From the outset, it had published extensive coverage, with detailed reports and speculation about the identity of the assassins. The Arab media focused on who had an interest in eliminating this general and pointed an accusing finger at Israel, claiming that Israel had carried out the assassination because of Suleiman's role in the Dir al-Zur reactor. The reaction of the Western secret services was different. None shed a tear over Suleiman's death. In June 2010, Flotilla 13 was decorated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Israel Defense Forces for several feats of arms, the nature of which was not revealed. One may wonder if the honors bestowed on the Naval Commando Unit are not, at least in part, in recognition of the Suleiman operation. This is the end of Part 6. Did you enjoy learning something new today? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more fascinating knowledge. Your support helps us continue bringing you engaging content. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.